The steam of the train swirled around Lena Hartley as she stood on the bustling railway platform, her eyes scanning the crowd for any signs of her escape. She clutched her carpet bag tightly, the weight of her medical kit reminding her of the past she was desperate to leave behind. Her ticket was for the northbound train, the one that would take her to her sister's house in Scotland. It was supposed to be the fresh start she so desperately needed. The scandals, the whispers at the London hospital, the looks of pity she needed to escape it all. But just as the final boarding bell rang, a voice broke through the noise of the station, a voice filled with desperation and panic. "Please come with me. My twins need you." Lena turned quickly, her heart skipping a beat. The voice was not one of a stranger. It held an urgency that she couldn't ignore. Standing before her was a man, disheveled and anxious, with wild eyes that seemed to plead for help. He was holding two children, their small, limp bodies nestled in his arms. The twins, no older than 5, were clearly in distress, pale, gasping for breath. A wave of recognition washed over Lena as she noticed his face, familiar yet unsettling. He was William Ashford, the owner of the nearby estate. "You're a nurse," he said, his voice trembling. "Please, they're dying." Lena's instincts kicked in, but so did her doubts. She had come to the station to flee, to leave the wreckage of her past behind. Her medical bag, with its hospital crest, was the only thing that tethered her to the very world she wanted to escape. Yet here was a man pleading with her, a stranger, asking for her help. The twins, Ava and Caleb, were gasping, their lips swelling, their breathing growing more labored with each passing second. Panic spread like wildfire in Lena's chest. She knew exactly what this was: anaphylactic shock. She had seen it before, too many times. She could help them, but at what cost? The train was leaving in 2 minutes, and she could feel her resolve crumbling. Her escape was slipping away. The station master's voice rang out, calling the final boarding. The passengers around her were already boarding, but no one paid any attention to the struggling children or the frantic father. It was as if everyone had learned to turn away from the suffering of others. But Lena couldn't. She couldn't leave these children to die. William's eyes locked onto hers, and for a brief moment, time seemed to freeze. He knew she was a nurse, and somehow he had recognized her. Perhaps it was the hospital crest on her medical bag. Perhaps it was fate. He spoke again, his voice a whisper of desperation. "Please, you're their only hope." Her heart pounded in her chest, and without thinking, Lena dropped her carpet bag. The weight of it felt symbolic, a burden she could no longer carry. She didn't know what would come next, but she knew she couldn't leave these children to suffer. "Get them to your carriage." "Now," Lena ordered, her voice firm, her hands already moving to assess the twins. William didn't hesitate. He turned and ran, carrying Ava, while Caleb struggled to breathe in his arms. Lena followed, her feet pounding on the platform as she moved toward the nearest carriage. Her medical kit, now her only connection to the world she once knew. She worked quickly, her fingers shaking as she rummaged through her kit. A cold compress for Ava's swollen lips, an herbal tincture to open Caleb's airways, and a steady hand to guide them both through the crisis. It was instinct, training, years of experience. But as she worked, she couldn't ignore the fear gnawing at her. What if she couldn't save them? What if this was just another failure she couldn't escape? William had managed to get the twins into the carriage. The station master, noticing the emergency, held the train for a few extra moments, but it wasn't enough. The northbound train, the one that was supposed to take Lena away from all of this, pulled out of the station, leaving her behind. She watched it disappear into the distance, the sound of its wheels fading as the reality of her decision settled in. The twins had stabilized, but only just. They needed proper medical care, and fast. "They need a doctor," Lena said firmly. "Right now." William nodded, his face a mixture of gratitude and guilt. "My estate," he said, his voice urgent. It's 10 miles west. Please come with us. I'll pay you whatever you need." Lena hesitated. This wasn't what she had planned. She had no intention of staying anywhere, least of all in the home of a man whose family she didn't know. But the twins were in her care now, and her sense of duty would not allow her to leave them. She climbed into the carriage with them, and as the door closed behind her, Lena caught sight of the family crest embossed in gold on the door. It was a symbol of wealth, of power, and yet the wreath of mourning still clung to it, a stark reminder that this family was in mourning, just as Lena was. William caught her eye as she stared at the wreath. "My wife," he said quietly. "She died 8 months ago." The twins were clinging to each other, their faces pale and scared. Ava's small voice broke the silence, her words barely audible. "Are we going to die too?" she whispered. Lena's heart broke as she looked at the frightened faces of the children. "No," she whispered back. "You're not going to die. Not if I can help it." As the carriage rattled away from the station, Lena realized she wasn't just running from her past anymore. She had stepped into someone else's, a family torn apart by grief, and a man who, in his desperation, had turned to her. There was no turning back now. As the carriage pulled away, Lena glanced back at the station, the last remnants of the train disappearing into the distance. She realized then, she wasn't just fleeing from her past. She had walked straight into someone else's. Ashford Manor loomed ahead, its grandeur lost beneath the weight of neglect. The estate was grand but surrounded by overgrown gardens, its windows shut tight as though the world outside had been shut out along with it. The family's mourning wreaths still hung on the front doors, a solemn reminder of the grief that still haunted these halls. Inside, the house was eerily quiet, the only signs of life being the elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Pemberton, and a lone stable hand. William led Lena through the house, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors, and explained in a broken voice that after Catherine's death, he had dismissed most of the staff, unable to afford the upkeep or bear the reminders of his loss. He was a man consumed by guilt, barely holding on, just as the twins, Ava and Caleb, were barely holding on to their sense of security. The nursery where Lena treated them was a room frozen in time, the late wife's presence still lingering in the soft colors of the curtains and the delicate floral arrangements on the dresser. As Lena administered care to the children, she couldn't help but feel the weight of Catherine's absence, the space left behind by the mother they had lost. William's guilt hung heavy in the air, and though Lena could feel the pull of her past, a past she was trying so hard to outrun, she couldn't ignore the need of these children, or the silent plea in William's eyes. He spoke of Catherine's death, the riding accident that took her life, his voice tinged with regret. He hadn't wanted her to leave that day, but their last conversation had ended in a fight, and now he was left to deal with the aftermath. His grief was raw, and Lena, too, was carrying her own wounds, though she refused to acknowledge them. As night fell and she prepared to leave, she couldn't shake the pull the children had on her, their need for her comfort and care. Ava, in particular, seemed to cling to Lena, and when she cried out in the night, Lena instinctively went to her. In that moment, she knew she couldn't leave, not yet. The children needed her, and for reasons Lena couldn't explain, she felt needed here. But it wasn't just about the children. William was struggling too, his pride fighting against the vulnerability he had shown by asking for her help. The tension between them was palpable, and yet there was something unspoken between them that neither could deny. The night ended with a proposition. William asked Lena to stay for 1 week to help him find proper care for the twins, promising her a generous payment. He needed her, and the twins had already accepted her in a way they hadn't accepted anyone since their mother's death. For Lena, the offer was tempting, but she knew it wasn't just about the money. She was getting too close, and letting herself get attached to them, especially William, was dangerous. But when Ava handed her a drawing, 4 stick figures, one of which was Lena, holding hands with the others. It was enough to break her resolve. She agreed, reluctantly, to stay for 1 week, knowing full well that this decision would change everything. Yet as Lena unpacked in her guest room later, she found a letter from the hospital board waiting for her. It was a request to return to London for an inquiry into the patient's death, a new development she hadn't anticipated. The past wasn't done with her yet, and now she was trapped in a house of grief, with no clear way to escape. Over the course of the next week, Lena slowly began to find a rhythm at Ashford Manor. Her days filled with a mix of medical care for the twins and attempts to bring order to the neglected estate. She meticulously tended to Ava and Caleb's allergies, carefully adjusting their diets and testing common foods for triggers. They had been living in fear of their own bodies, but Lena worked patiently with them, teaching them how to advocate for themselves, how to ask for help when something felt wrong. It was a small victory, one that began to heal not only the children, but the house itself. With the windows thrown open and the scent of fresh flowers wafting in, the manor started to feel less like a tomb and more like a home. The twins' laughter, though hesitant at first, started to fill the halls, and for the first time in months, the house felt alive. William, too, began to change. Lena couldn't help but notice how he watched her with admiration as she worked, his eyes following her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster, though she tried to ignore it. There was an unspoken understanding between them, one that neither of them was willing to address. But there was no denying the growing connection. Lena found herself laughing at his dry wit. Her cheeks flushed from the warmth of his gaze, even though she tried to keep their interactions strictly professional. She had come here to escape, not to get entangled in the web of grief and longing that was so clearly woven through every corner of the estate. Yet, each day, she found herself drawn closer to him. At night, after the children had gone to bed, she would sit with him by the fire, the silence between them comfortable, though thick with the weight of things unsaid. One evening, as she mended one of his shirts, an act so intimate that she found herself blushing, he picked wildflowers from the garden and placed them on the table beside her. "For your room," he said quietly, his voice soft with something she couldn't quite place. She took the flowers, their fragrance filling her senses, and smiled, though she quickly looked away to hide the warmth spreading in her chest. She knew she couldn't let herself get attached. She couldn't afford to. Still, it was hard to ignore the way her heart ached when she saw him alone, staring out the window, lost in thought. It was clear that his grief hadn't fully healed, even if the estate was beginning to show signs of life again. His wife, Catherine, had been gone for months, but William was still living in the shadow of her death, a shadow that seemed to grow longer with each passing day. Lena's own past, though she tried to keep it buried, was a constant reminder that grief was a complicated thing. She understood it all too well. The day she lost her patient, the child who had died under her care despite all her efforts, was a wound that would never fully heal. She had been blamed for the death, even though the complications had been beyond her control. The family's wealth and influence had made sure that the scandal had ruined her career, and she had been forced to flee, unable to clear her name, unable to look anyone in the eye. She had planned to disappear completely, to leave the world of medicine behind. But here she was, standing in a house full of grief, her medical skills once again in demand. She hadn't come to heal anyone. She had come to forget. But she couldn't ignore the twins, their desperate need for her, or the pull she felt toward William. The weeks passed, and the village began to take notice of the woman staying at Ashford Manor. During a trip to the local market for supplies, the townsfolk began whispering. It started innocently enough, with the vicar's wife mentioning that Lena was a new governess at the estate. But soon, rumors began to swirl that William was courting her, that the once bereaved lord was already moving on from his wife's death. The gossip reached Lena's ears as she stood by the bakery, Ava proudly announcing, "This is our Lena." Caleb, always more reserved, added with a small smile, "She's staying forever." It was a simple statement, yet it made Lena's stomach turn. She wasn't staying forever. She wasn't sure what she was doing here at all. She had come to Ashford Manor to help, to stay for a week, and she had never planned on becoming a permanent part of their lives. But the twins were becoming attached to her, and she was becoming attached to them. They were so much like the children she had lost, and she couldn't help but care for them. It was a dangerous thing, becoming emotionally involved, but it felt impossible to stop. That evening, after the trip to the market, the true complication of her situation presented itself in the form of Lady Beatrice. Catherine's sister arrived unannounced at the manor, her eyes narrowing when she saw Lena with the twins. Beatrice, a woman of haughty manners and sharp tongue, immediately accused William of replacing Catherine already. She demanded to know Lena's credentials, her past, her reasons for being there. It wasn't just concern, it was suspicion, a threat, and Lena knew it. "I'll be investigating you, Miss Hartley," Beatrice declared, her voice dripping with disdain. "You may have fooled my brother, but I won't let you fool anyone else." Lena stood her ground, her heart pounding in her chest, but her resolve didn't waver. She had nothing to hide, yet the fear that gripped her was real. If Beatrice succeeded in her investigation, if she uncovered Lena's past, it could ruin everything. Beatrice didn't stop at her verbal assault. She went straight to the village constable, spreading rumors and questioning Lena's fitness as a governess. The tension in the air became palpable. Mothers began to pull their children away from Lena, and the village's attitude shifted. It wasn't just the Ashford estate that was under scrutiny now. It was Lena herself. The whispers, the looks of distrust, all of it started to weigh on her. She had already fled once. She couldn't do it again. But she also couldn't stay here, becoming the subject of suspicion and scandal. That night, after Beatrice's visit, William found Lena sitting in the nursery, staring at the twins as they slept. She looked up at him as he entered, his face drawn with exhaustion. "I'm sorry about Beatrice," he said quietly. "She's just lost like the rest of us." Lena didn't respond immediately, her mind racing. She had always avoided conflict, running from the consequences of her past. But she couldn't run anymore. Not for Beatrice. Not from William. "She's not wrong to question me," Lena admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Finally, she told him the full story. The scandal, the patient who died under her care, the whispers that destroyed her career, the grief she carried, the burden of being blamed for something she couldn't control. William listened in silence, his face softening as she spoke. When she finished, he took a step forward, his voice steady. "You're not defined by who you couldn't save," he said. "You're here now, and that's what matters." He paused before adding, "I've already investigated you. I know about your past, and I know the truth." Lena stared at him, shocked. You investigated me?" William nodded, his expression serious. "I had to know who I was trusting with my children. And I trust you, Lena. You saved their lives more than once." His words were a balm to her wounded soul, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt a flicker of hope. But as she glanced down at the twins, who were now sleeping soundly, a deeper truth settled in her heart. She had come to Ashford Manor to escape, but she had found something far more dangerous, a family who needed her. And whether she was ready for it or not, she had already become a part of their story. That night, as she lay in bed, Lena couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to change, something she wasn't prepared for. She had come here to heal, but the wounds of the past weren't done with her yet. And as she reached for the letter in her bag, the letter from the hospital board requesting her return to London, Lena knew that the ghosts of her past were closing in. She was trapped, not just by her own decisions, but by the past that refused to let her go. The weeks at Ashford Manor had been a balm to her wounded heart, but it was only a matter of time before the past caught up with her, and when it did, everything she had built here could come crumbling down. The pressure was mounting at Ashford Manor, and it wasn't just the twins' health, or the emotional turmoil that had begun to surface. The looming threat of Lady Beatrice's investigation into Lena's past was beginning to take shape, and the quiet whispers from the village had turned into open suspicion. Lena had never wanted to be the center of attention. Her only goal had been to help the children and disappear into the background of their lives. But now, with Beatrice's threats hanging over her, the villagers began to treat her as an outsider, as someone who didn't belong. It wasn't just the gossip. The very air around her felt charged with judgment. Mothers would cross to the other side of the street with their children when Lena walked past, eyes filled with fear or disdain. The tension reached its peak when Beatrice, not content with just rumors, hired a private investigator to dig into Lena's past. The investigator began visiting the local constable, asking questions about Lena's character, and even gathering newspaper clippings from the sensationalized reports about the scandal in London. The story of the little girl who had died under her care had become public knowledge again, and the words, "dangerous woman," were starting to spread through the village like wildfire. Lena could feel the weight of it all, but as much as she wanted to run, she couldn't. Not when the twins needed her, not when the family was finally beginning to heal. William, though a man of wealth and status, had never been one to take lightly the cruelty of grief. His own heartache over his wife's death had kept him locked in the past. But as Lena worked with the children, as she tended to them with both skill and love, he began to see the possibility of moving forward, of rebuilding. And yet, despite all of that, the looming shadow of Beatrice's accusations hung over everything. It was a bitter reminder of the past Lena was trying to escape, and the thought of it threatened to unravel everything she had worked so hard to build here. But Lena's biggest test came one afternoon when Caleb had a severe allergic reaction. He had been playing in the garden when he was stung by a bee, an allergy they had identified but hadn't fully accounted for in the rush of their busy days. It was just a moment of carelessness, but it was enough to send Caleb into immediate anaphylactic shock. Lena was quick, her hands shaking with the urgency of it all, but her mind was sharp. She instructed William to get the doctor, but she didn't wait for him. She knew she didn't have time. The child was already starting to turn blue, his breathing shallow and rapid. Ava stood frozen, her small hands clenched, eyes wide with fear. She had already lost so much, and now, it seemed, she was on the brink of losing Caleb too. "Don't let him die like Mama," Ava whispered, her voice trembling. It was a moment that would haunt Lena forever. She had always known the stakes, but never had they felt so high. She couldn't fail this child, not after everything. Not when she had finally found a family that had started to trust her again. The minutes felt like hours as Lena worked, applying the adrenaline shot from her medical kit, positioning Caleb's body just right, forcing his airway open. She could feel the life in his small body slipping away, and the fear clutched at her throat, but she held it together. She had to. She couldn't let this child die. When the doctor finally arrived, Lena had stabilized Caleb enough for him to breathe more easily. Dr. Morrison, the respected village physician, checked her work with a professional eye, nodding with approval. "Flawless," he said, his voice a deep rumble of admiration. He had seen many emergencies in his time, but Lena's quick thinking and skill had saved Caleb's life. It was a quiet validation, one that Lena hadn't expected, and it filled her with a sense of relief that was quickly overshadowed by the weight of everything else. It wasn't just about Caleb. It was about her past, her future, and her place in this household. Dr. Morrison, always the professional, turned to Lena and spoke softly. "I know that case. The one in London. The child who died. I can't say much, but I can tell you this. You did everything you could. You weren't the one at fault. That family was looking for someone to blame, and you got caught in the crossfire. You were cleared, and that's the truth." Lena's breath caught in her throat, the relief washing over her in waves. For the first time in years, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of that guilt alone. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. As Caleb slowly recovered, Lena found herself thinking about her own guilt, the things she had carried for so long, and the pain she had never let go. William, too, was no stranger to guilt. The truth of his wife's death had never been fully understood by anyone but him. Catherine had been suffering from severe melancholy after the birth of the twins, a depression she had hidden from everyone, including William. He had sent her out that fateful day in anger, their last words a quarrel that had left her feeling unheard and unloved. When she died in that accident, William had blamed himself. He had found her body too late, and the twins had witnessed the aftermath. They had been traumatized, and their silence was a constant reminder of that day. But as Lena sat with him one evening, reading to the twins by the fire, William finally spoke the truth. "I never knew she was suffering. I thought she was just angry with me. I thought it was just the stress of the children and the estate. But she was hiding something much darker." He looked at her, his eyes filled with an unspoken plea for understanding. "I should have seen it. I should have known." It was a moment of raw vulnerability, one that Lena couldn't ignore. She had seen the pain in his eyes, the remorse, the guilt that had weighed him down for months. They were both trapped by their pasts, both carrying the ghosts of their losses. Lena had tried so hard to run from hers, but it was clear now that she couldn't. She had to confront it, just as William had to confront his own guilt. And then, as if the weight of it all wasn't enough, Lena found herself reading Catherine's diary, a discovery that would alter everything. As she flipped through the pages, she came upon the final entry, the one written on the day of the accident. It was a simple note, a confession that Catherine had never been able to make to anyone else. "William and I quarreled again. He doesn't understand my melancholy. Perhaps I should tell him the truth about why I'm truly unhappy." The entry ended abruptly, and Lena felt a chill run down her spine. The secrets of this house were far deeper than she had ever imagined. There was more to Catherine's death than anyone had let on, and now Lena was caught in the middle of it all. As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Lena realized that the house wasn't just haunted by Catherine's death. It was haunted by secrets, by things left unsaid, by guilt and regret. And now, she was a part of it. There was no going back. The past was catching up with her, and no matter how hard she tried to run, it would always find its way into the present. She had to face it now, whether she was ready or not. And as the sun set over Ashford Manor, Lena knew that the storm was just beginning. The challenges ahead would be more than just medical crises or village gossip. They would test everything she had left, the loyalty she had to her patients, to the twins, to herself. And the cost of staying at Ashford Manor might just be higher than she ever could have anticipated. The tension in Ashford Manor reached a boiling point as the legal battle over the twins' custody loomed ever closer. The village, once friendly and welcoming, had turned cold with the spread of rumors about Lena's past. And now Lady Beatrice's full-scale investigation threatened to tear apart the fragile peace that had settled over the estate. William had hired a solicitor from London, a sharp and experienced man, but even he couldn't deny the gravity of the situation. The whispers of Lena's scandal had become more than just idle gossip. They were now a weapon, and Beatrice was wielding it with ruthless precision. The village, divided and unsure, had begun to turn against Lena. It wasn't just the whispers anymore. There were cold looks, turned shoulders, and veiled accusations. Mothers avoided Lena in the market, and even the vicar began to express doubt. The pressure was crushing. Lena had become the symbol of everything wrong in William's life, a reminder of the death of Catherine and the scandal that now threatened to destroy his family. Despite the mounting pressure, William stood by her. He refused to let Beatrice's campaign succeed. He knew Lena had done nothing wrong, and he would fight to prove it. But the deeper they got into the case, the more complicated things became. William's solicitor warned that the legal proceedings would focus on Lena's past, and Beatrice would stop at nothing to paint her as a dangerous influence. The key issue was Lena's role in the family. Was she a governess, a nurse, or something more? The answer would determine whether or not she had any standing to care for the twins. There was no easy way to define it, no clear boundary between her role as their caretaker and the growing bond between them. And as the days passed, William and Lena continued to avoid confronting the feelings that were growing between them. They had formed a deep connection, but neither of them was ready to acknowledge it. The love between them, unspoken and unnamed, was being tested in ways neither of them had ever expected. The hearing was set for a week later, and every day leading up to it felt like a slow suffocation. Lena spent her days with the twins, trying to keep the atmosphere light, trying to show them that no matter what happened, they were safe with her. Yet, in the back of her mind, the looming question of her future remained. Could she remain at Ashford Manor if she lost the case? Would she have to leave the twins, the only family she had started to care for in so long? As the day of the hearing approached, the house became a battleground of emotions, with everyone walking on eggshells, knowing that whatever happened in court would alter their lives forever. The night before the hearing, Lena sat alone in her room, her mind racing with doubt and fear. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, the memories of the child she couldn't save, the accusations, the humiliation. But she also knew that this was her chance for redemption. This was her chance to prove, not just to the world, but to herself, that she was not defined by her past. She had already saved Caleb's life once, and she had saved Ava's as well. She had been their protector, their caregiver, when they had needed her most. And now, she would stand up for herself in a way she never had before. The next day, the courthouse was filled with tension. The magistrate, a stern and weary man, called the proceedings to order, and Beatrice immediately launched into her case. She painted a picture of Lena as a dangerous woman, someone who had failed in the past and was now trying to use the twins to redeem herself. She brought out the newspaper clippings, read the sensational headlines aloud, and tried to make Lena's past the focus of the case. The cross-examination was brutal. The questions came fast and sharp, each one designed to break Lena down. "You let a child die under your care?" Beatrice sneered, her voice dripping with disdain. "You fled London in disgrace, didn't you? What makes you think you could be trusted with these children?" Lena's heart raced as she stood there, her hands trembling. She had prepared for this moment, but the words still stung. She wasn't prepared for the cruelty in Beatrice's eyes, the venom in her voice. But Lena was no longer the woman she had been. She had changed. She had learned to stand up for herself. "Yes, I let a child die under my care," Lena said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "But it wasn't because of any failure on my part. The child had a condition no one could have known about. The family blamed me, and the newspapers followed suit, but I did everything I could to save her. And I left London because I couldn't live with the fact that I couldn't save her." She paused, gathering her strength. "But I've saved other children since then. I've treated hundreds of children. I'm not the woman they want to make me out to be. I'm the woman who saved Caleb's life. I'm the woman who kept Ava from slipping into the same despair that almost took them both. I'm the woman who has earned the right to be here." There was silence in the courtroom as Lena's words hung in the air. She had spoken from a heart, and there was no turning back now. Dr. Morrison, the village physician who had witnessed Lena's quick thinking during Caleb's allergic reaction, took the stand next. He confirmed that Lena had acted swiftly and correctly, that without her intervention, Caleb would have died. His testimony was a turning point, a moment of clarity that shattered Beatrice's accusations. "Miss Hartley saved that child's life," Dr. Morrison said, his voice calm and authoritative. "I've worked with many physicians in my time, and I've seen many emergencies, but her work was flawless. She acted with precision and care, and that's something that cannot be denied." With that, the tide began to turn in Lena's favor. The courtroom shifted, and the whispers of doubt faded into the background. The magistrate seemed to consider everything carefully, and then, just as the tension in the room became unbearable, the twins were called to testify. They were brought into the chambers separately, away from the scrutiny of the court. Ava, her small voice trembling but determined, was the first to speak. "Lena makes the bad dreams stop," she said, her eyes wide and earnest. Caleb, standing beside her, added, "She's saved my life. Twice. She's our angel." Both children stood firm in their testimony, their love for Lena shining through in every word. When it was William's turn, he stood before the magistrate and addressed the court. His voice, once filled with doubt and guilt, was now steady, filled with conviction. "When my wife died, I died too. This house became a tomb. My children stopped speaking. I stopped living. Then a stranger missed her train to save my children. She could have walked away at any moment, but she stayed." He looked at Lena, his eyes filled with emotion. "You ask about Miss Hartley's role in my household," he said, turning to the magistrate. "She's the woman I love, the mother my children needed, the light that brought us all back to life." It was a declaration of love, a moment of vulnerability that broke through the walls of grief and guilt that had consumed them both. William turned to Lena, his voice breaking as he looked at her. "Lena Hartley, regardless of this court's decision, will you marry me?" The courtroom gasped, the tension shattering as William, in front of everyone, asked the question that had been in his heart all along. The words hung in the air, and for a moment, Lena's world seemed to stop. Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked at him, her eyes filled with tears. "Yes," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes." The courtroom erupted into applause, but the real victory was in a quiet moment between them. Their past had been full of pain and loss, but now, in this moment, they had found each other. The battle wasn't over, but they had already won. No matter what the magistrate decided, they had already chosen each other. The final moments of the courtroom drama were filled with a tense silence as the magistrate retreated to deliberate, leaving the entire room in limbo, unsure of what the future would hold. Beatrice, who had spent the entire trial trying to tear apart the fragile family that had begun to rebuild, stood in the corner of the courtroom, her arms crossed in defiance. Her face, usually cold and unyielding, softened ever so slightly as the reality of the situation began to settle in. Lena, still reeling from William's public declaration of love and the weight of the case that had just unfolded, stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her heart racing. She had never imagined she would be in this position, not only fighting for the twins' future, but also for her place in their lives. For a moment, she thought back to the woman she had once been, the nurse who had fled from scandal, the woman running from her past, convinced she would never be able to heal. But that woman felt like someone else entirely now. The woman standing before the magistrate, trembling but resolute, had become someone stronger, someone who had built a new future from the ashes of her past. When a magistrate finally returned, his expression grave, the room fell into an almost suffocating silence. He cleared his throat and, after a long pause, spoke. "The petition to remove Miss Hartley as the twins' caretaker is hereby denied. It is clear that these children are thriving under the care and guidance of Miss Hartley, and there is no reason to disrupt the healing environment that has been established at Ashford Manor." There was a collective exhale from the room, a mixture of relief and triumph. Lena felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from her shoulders, but she wasn't the only one who felt it. William's eyes, filled with both relief and gratitude, met hers, and without saying a word, he stepped toward her, taking her hand in his. It was a small but powerful gesture, and it sent a message that no words could fully express. Lady Beatrice, despite her obvious disappointment, remained silent as the judgment was handed down, her bitterness simmering beneath the surface. As the magistrate concluded the session, the courtroom erupted into a chorus of murmurs and whispers, some of approval, others of dismay. But for Lena and William, the real battle had already been won. Beatrice's last attempt to tear them apart had failed, and now they were free to move forward. The feeling of freedom, of finally being able to breathe without the looming specter of the past hanging over them, was indescribable. As the crowd dispersed, Lena and William made their way out of the courthouse, the weight of their shared history finally starting to feel like something they could bear together. Outside, the day had turned to evening, and the sky was painted with shades of pink and orange, a sign that the storm had passed and a new chapter was about to begin. But before they could even step onto the street, a figure approached them. Beatrice. Lena braced herself, but instead of the confrontation she expected, Beatrice's demeanor had shifted. Her face was flushed with emotion, her eyes filled with unshed tears. "I was wrong," Beatrice said, her voice unsteady. "I thought I was doing what was best for Catherine's memory, for the children. But in my grief, I lost sight of what really matters." She looked down at the ground, as though the weight of her own actions was too much to bear. "I miss my sister," Beatrice continued, her voice cracking. "I thought that if I could protect her children from more pain, I could somehow bring her back. I couldn't bear the thought of losing them too." Lena felt a pang of sympathy for Beatrice, though she knew the woman had been cruel in her attempts to sabotage Lena's place in the twins' lives. Grief had a way of clouding judgment, making people do things they wouldn't normally do. Beatrice's eyes finally met Lena's. "I see now that I was wrong. Catherine would have wanted this. She would have wanted her children to be loved and cared for, no matter the cost. And I can see that you love them. You saved them. I can't deny that." There was a long pause, and for a moment, neither woman knew what to say. Beatrice, once a symbol of antagonism, now stood before Lena, her walls cracked, her vulnerability exposed. After a beat, Beatrice reached into her bag and pulled out a small silver picture frame. "For your family portrait," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've never been able to give him a proper home, not truly. But maybe in time, we can all find some peace." The gesture was unexpected, and though it didn't erase the pain of the past, it was a step toward healing. Beatrice turned and walked away, leaving Lena and William to stand in the quiet aftermath. They didn't speak for a moment, but the air between them had changed. There was a weight lifted, a quiet understanding that their future, though uncertain, was no longer clouded by the ghosts of the past. Over the next few weeks, the wedding preparations began. It was a simple affair, nothing grand, but it was everything Lena had come to hope for. The ceremony was held in the village church, a small but beautiful building adorned with autumn flowers. Lena, dressed in a simple cream gown that had been altered from Mrs. Pemberton's daughter's dress, stood beside William as they exchanged vows. Ava and Caleb, their smiles radiant, acted as the flower girl and ring bearer, their joy infectious as they filled the air with laughter. Dr. Morrison, who had become a father figure to Lena in the absence of her own, walked her down the aisle, his arm around her with the same pride he had shown when he spoke on her behalf in court. The ceremony was short but heartfelt, and when William spoke his vows, there was no doubt in Lena's heart that this was the life she was meant to live. "I asked you to come with me, and you've been coming toward me every day since," William said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've never stopped meeting you halfway." Lena smiled through her tears, her heart swelling with love. "I missed my train that day," she said softly, "but I found my destination instead. I vow to never run from love again." As the ceremony came to a close and they exited the church as husband and wife, the village that had once been so wary of Lena now embraced her. The baker's wife, who had once avoided her, offered her a slice of allergy-safe wedding cake with a smile. Even the vicar, who had questioned Lena's place in a manor, gave her a nod of approval. It was a new beginning, not just for Lena and William, but for the entire family. The reception at Ashford Manor was filled with warmth, laughter, and the promise of brighter days ahead. And as the evening drew to a close, with the stars shining brightly overhead, Lena found herself standing with William, their hands clasped tightly together. They had been through so much, and though their future was still uncertain, they now had each other. A year later, the same railway platform where Lena had once stood, ready to flee, became a symbol of her journey. She stood there with William and the twins, watching a northbound train depart. Ava tugged on her arm, looking up at her with wide eyes. "Mama, is that the train you almost took?" she asked, her voice innocent. Lena smiled, her heart full. "Yes, darling, the train that led me to you." William, standing beside her, glanced at her with a soft smile. "Do you ever wonder what if?" he asked, his voice gentle. Lena shook her head, her hand resting on his. "Never. Some missed trains are actually found destinies." As they walked away from the platform, hand in hand, Lena looked back once, a quiet whisper leaving her lips. "Thank you," she said softly, though it was unclear whether it was to fate, to chance, or to William. The family of four walked away together, no longer strangers to the love they had found, no longer defined by the pain of the past. They were home,